Hey, welcome to Two Doctors Homestead. My name's Daniel, and I wanted to have a quick chat with you guys before I got out and start working on the garden. It's a good day for gardening. I probably need to mow that lawn there behind me, but I want to talk about grid down, right? Life after grid down, how to survive a grid down situation. It seems relevant with everything going on in the world, and kind of dig into grid down a little bit, right? And you could say there's two kinds, right? Two levels of a blackout, of a grid down situation. You have a standard, blackout scenario. You could have a blackout from a CME, or you have the EMP, and I'd really split those into two categories. You've got a standard blackout CME situation, or you have a EMP situation. They're both somewhat different in terms of the overall long-term impact. So I wanted to jump into that. And a few things, right? A few things you can do right away to determine, was it a EMP, right? Did we just get hit by an EMP? And we're going to talk about what an EMP is and some of the technology that currently exists in the world of EMP right now as we go. But first thing you can do, right? You have a blackout, power's out, right? You're sitting at home, power went out. Well, how do you know? Was it an EMP? Was it a blackout? Good test is your phone. Does your phone still work? It's likely in a HEMP or EMP situation, your phone may not work anymore, right? Do you still have internet on your phone? Do you still have cell service? Does your car still work? If you have a radio, old-fashioned radio, does your radio still work? And if you're in a situation where none of those work anymore, it's probably an EMP, which is the beginning of a serious Shtf type situation. Not to say a grid down couldn't be bad as well, right? And we'll kind of jump in to the difference there, right? If you're on the road and an EMP hits, you'll know because your car will likely stop working, unless you have an older car with limited electronic components. There's a good chance if an EMP hit while you're on the road, your car and every other car around you would stop working, right? No more cars. Everything kind of grinds to a halt, maybe not gracefully, right? Without electronics, your car would still have inertia, would still be moving forward. Brakes may or may not be functioning as you'd expect. Could be accidents, right? But if you're on the road and your car suddenly stops and all the cars around you suddenly stop and your phone doesn't work anymore, we probably just got hit by an EMP, right? A normal blackout, or probably even a CME, is unlikely to stop your car from working. An EMP would. If you're in that situation, you're in your car, I would say the first thing you probably want to do in the first couple minutes is seek shelter, if that's possible, and not necessarily the shelter of your car. There's a lot of potential war game type scenarios out there where an EMP attack could be a prelude to a nuclear attack, right? They've talked about that if Russia was to come at us with nuclear weapons, or China or some other potential adversary, we don't really know. We have plenty of adversaries right now. They might EMP first to create confusion, to create blindness as a precursor for a nuclear attack. So if you're driving down the road and your car suddenly stops, find good shelter, right? Follow the nuclear protocols in that if a nuke goes off, first thing you're going to want to do is cover your eyes, because the bright flash could blind you, if not temporarily. And then you've got the radiation coming in, right? So first thing probably is start looking for shelter. If you're in the middle of the country and there's nothing around, shelter might be difficult, but it's also possible, if you're in the middle of the country and nothing's around, that you wouldn't be a target for a nuclear weapon anyway. And that, once again, depends on where you're at. And there are nuke maps you can look at, right? You can dig into the nuke maps and understand in general if you live or operate in areas that are targets, right? But seek shelter. You'll know within probably an hour or two, right, if nuclear weapons are going to be following up the EMP attack, because they'll start hitting, they'll start detonating. Even if they don't blow up in your area, you'll probably know if they blew up in the country, right? So first thing really in your car is seek shelter. First thing in your house, if you're home and you think, hey, it's an EMP or it's a prolonged blackout, right? There's different kinds of blackouts. We get blackouts all the time, might be a couple hours. If you're concerned, it could be an extended blackout, and we'll talk a little bit about those. First thing I would do is probably start filling up reserve water. whether that's a water bob, which is the bags you can get from Red Cross or Amazon that go in your bathtub, fill up your extra pitchers, buckets, something like that, right? Water is going to be a critical resource in any kind of major blackout or EMP situation. You'll want to get that right away, right? Once the pumps stop running to pump the water into the towers into the house, you may have water supply issues. So first thing you can do right away at home is start filling up your water, get your supplies ready, appraise the situation. If you're on the road, seek shelter, right? And at least until enough time has passed that you're not concerned that it could be a nuclear attack, or that you've had more time to gather information about the situation. But if you're in the car and all the cars stop, probably an EMP. So let's jump onto a blackout, right? Blackout, say a non-EMP blackout, we'll say non-CME blackout, right? You got possible causes of blackout: cyber attack, terrorism, extremism, natural disaster, equipment failure, right? Any of those could cause a blackout situation that could last for hours, days, weeks, maybe months or longer, and that really depends on the type of damage or the incident that caused the blackout, right? And I think it's important to jump in on the American grid. What is the North American power grid? And it's actually split up into several sections, right? So you've got two major sections: East Coast, West Coast, the Eastern interconnection and the Western interconnection. And there's three minor power grids in North America. You have the Alaskan interconnect, you have Quebec, and you have Texas. So depending on the event, say natural disaster, terrorist attack, something like that, in America, I would suspect it's unlikely all those grids would drop at the same time. Even a cyber attack, I'd be a little surprised if they're able to drop all the grids at the same time. So you might hear about a grid failure on TV. You might be on the unlucky part of the country that got a major grid down, right? And we're focused on something that's probably going to last more than a couple hours, right? So talking about our power grid here in America, most of it was built in the 60s and 70s and is over 25 years old. 75% of it's over 25 years old. So it is ill repair by a lot of the things I've read. Needs a lot of maintenance, needs a lot of upgrades, certainly needs to be modernized. It doesn't seem like that's happening at the kind of pace we might like. Especially if you're talking about bringing in green energy, right? You want solar, you want those kind of power, the windmills and whatnot, and we're a long way. We're not there. We're a long way from having that kind of a grid, or a grid that could support all of the electric cars we're supposed to be buying, right? Grid's not there. It's 70% is 25 years old. So our grid is actually under attack constantly. If you look at the U.S. Department of Energy, there were 163 attacks on the grid last year, which is an increase of 77%. So the grid is under attack, and by that I'm not saying 163 attacks by Russians. It could be extremists, could be cyber attacks, but there actually are constant attacks on the grids, and there were several power outages last year through minor grid attacks in localized areas, right? One of the groups they caught allegedly said they were going to rob some business, and they figured out how to drop the grid to rob the business, right? Something out of Ocean's 11, but they didn't seem like the Ocean's 11 types. So getting into a grid down scenario, there's a lot of great fantasy novels, a lot of great resources. Some people call it prehistory. You've got the William Forstchen 1 Second After series, great fantasy, and I think he made an effort to make it as realistic as he thought it could be or as possible. There's also the October Fall series that I'm getting into. I think I'm about 4 books in. Great series on EMP. Those books focused on an EMP attack, and I think they're well thought out. Once again, it is fantasy, it is fiction, but I think they're well thought out. American Blackout is a great movie on the possibility or the implications of surviving in a big blackout situation, and it's a movie that's on TV that you might enjoy. I want to focus on a more factual event that happened right? So these are great books. I've read them. I enjoyed them. But let's dig into an event that actually happened, right? Something that happened, and we can kind of build on that and learn from that event. And that was Venezuela in 2019. So in Venezuela in 2019, there was a 10-day power outage. Started March 7th, went through March 14th, took out 23 states, took out power in 23 states, which is most of Venezuela and surrounding areas. There was a second one between the 14th and the 16th, and then there was something from the 25th to the 28th, and in all total, they had lost power for 10 days, right? And in those 10 days, there were at least 43 deaths reported in 10 days. There were serious problems in the hospitals, clinics, across industry, transport, and water service. And that was 10 days. 10 days, everything shut down. People were dying, right? The most vulnerable sectors, and this is based on Venezuela, this is what happened from what I've read and what I understood of what I read and what happened in Venezuela. Most vulnerable sectors of society were affected. Power outages, right? Power was down. Water was unavailable. Food shortages, transportation, medical shortage, right? And the most important, the biggest large centers of population, the cities had zero water for more than 4 days, right? So immediately no water is available. And what do we say if you think there's going to be a big blackout, you think there's an EMP, something like that just happened? First thing you're going to want to do is build up your immediate water reserve, whether you're filling up your bathtubs, whether you have a water bag for the bathtub, 5-gallon buckets, whatever you've got. First thing you're going to want to do is get that extra water, right? That's easy, that's free, that's cheap. If you're wrong, you just pour it out, you put it in your garden, whatever you want to do. If you don't want to waste the water, certainly don't have to. According to Washington Post, analysis said that 2/3 of Venezuelan population, 20 million people in Venezuela, were without water partially or completely in the weeks after the blackout. So even though the power came on, right, it was, say, 10 days if you want of a blackout. It took a while. It took weeks to get everything up and running in Venezuela. And there was some talk about what happened, why did it happen, was it sabotage, was it political? But they're also saying it was probably poor maintenance on their grid, on their power sources, inexperience, right? So let's kind of go area by area through what was impacted in their blackout. And you could think about if this happened in America, what would it mean for us, right? And perhaps we'd be better prepared. There's a lot of people saying we haven't really invested the money as a society to prepare the way we should be. So immediately 96% of the telecommunication infrastructure was disabled, right? So unlikely your cell phone wouldn't turn off. It's a regular blackout, unlike in an EMP. You might not get cell service anyway. They probably have batteries at the cell towers, there's generators and whatnot, but even with that 96%, telecommunication was disabled, right? Batteries only last so long. Generators require fuel and maintenance, and someone has to be there. So in a big grid down, expect very quickly there's a high chance that your cell phone's not going to work, right? You're not going to have cell service. And of course, the use of payment cards was not possible, right? Because without power, banks can't process transactions, and there's probably not enough redundant power to keep all the banks and the ATMs and all that stuff going. So forget about your payment cards, forget about your debit card, forget about your money in the bank, forget about your cell phone, right? Any kind of major blackout, even not in an EMP situation. It's what we saw in Venezuela, right? Hospitals, of course, hospitals have generators, but they're not going to be able to run necessarily at 100% capability. They certainly were not in Venezuela. So according to the New York Times, top medical officials said there were 47 deaths in the main hospital, half of which were attributed to the blackout. So people in the hospital died. There were, of course, several patients with gunshot wounds who could have received treatment. They didn't get proper treatment, so they actually had amputations, right? So immediately power goes out and we're back to Civil War where they're sawing arms off, right? I mean, it happened, right? This is said, I'm not going with a fantasy novel here. There's some great fantasy novels. This is just looking at what happened in Venezuela in 2019. This 86-year-old man died from fracturing his skull. And there were patients robbed on 2 floors of a hospital that only had lighting in the emergency room from a generator when an armed group gained access to the hospital. So we're talking within a 10-day power outage, there were looters and robbers in the hospital. Pregnant women had to be sent outside. So immediately, you're talking immediately things fell apart. Looters and robbers in the hospital. So infrastructure and industry, what happened with infrastructure and industry? Public transportation was shut down, which I could see that without power. You don't have the infrastructure behind, say, running the buses and those kinds of things. So it happened. Public transportation was shut down immediately, made it more difficult for people to get anywhere. And then, according to Coin Industria, the industrial sector lost about 220 million from the blackout. So just losing 10 days of productivity and damage to the equipment, 220 million. That was Venezuela. In the United States, the number, of course, would be significantly higher, because even if only one grid went down, East Coast, West Coast, shuts everything down, there's going to be a massive long-term economic impact. Also, machines were damaged, right? Elements of the petroleum delivery operations were disrupted. Some damaged installations could not be brought back online quickly. So you're talking about machines getting damaged, right? You just cut the power on one thing and it might not shut off gracefully. There could be a lot of things going on that were depending on the power. So things are going to get damaged, right? It's not always as easy as once the power's back on, you throw the switch, everything's back on, right? Equipment used to make aluminum at the state-run Vanillium, subsidiary of corporate Venezuela, was damaged. The entire industry was shut down, right? So equipment gets damaged when the power goes out. Talking about looting, right? Looting happened immediately. It doesn't take very long, right? Hundreds of buildings were looted in the city, not only because lack of electricity, but also lack of supply of gasoline and drinking water. 70% of a shopping center was looted. 30 stores were looted. Areas were completely destroyed. So, and why? Why the looting? Once again, without the power. You don't have electricity to run the pumps to get the water to your house. Without the power, how long are the local grocery stores going to stay open? Foods gets destroyed in the freezers. Things go crazy very quickly, right? No power means no water, no sewer, no supply chain, limited access to hospitals, limited response from police and fire. So everything falls apart almost immediately if you look at Venezuela, if you take that as a case study. Now, unlike in an EMP, in a major blackout situation, cars would still work, but gas stations maybe not so much, right? Does every gas station have a generator they can use? Because they got to pump the water up. They got to pump the gasoline up to the pumps. They got to be able to charge you for the gas. They're probably not going to give it away for free in a blackout. Gasoline's stored underground. So are you going to be able to go to the gas station and get gas? Probably not. Right? I mean, there might be gasoline available day one. You still have a car, but what's traffic going to be like? Certainly in the cities, it's going to be problematic without things like traffic lights, right? Probably going to be a lot of gridlock, right? And this is assuming not an EMP, regular blackout. Are you going to be able to get home? Are you going to be able to get out of there, right? Certainly violence in the cities of Venezuela. They saw violence almost immediately after the blackout. No security cameras, slower response from police because everything's happening at the same time. Are there enough police in your area to handle things now? Maybe not, and certainly not in some areas. Are there enough police to handle everything going down at the same time? Probably not. So you're talking about slower response. Same thing with fire trucks and whatnot, slower response. So in a good sense, you're going to be on your own. And I think that's how the people in Venezuela felt. And this was only 10 days, right? How do you survive? Food, water, medicine, sanitation, backup power for medical devices. If you have things like a CPAP machine, hopefully you have solar, right? So we're saying grid down. Solar probably still going to work, right? We didn't say EMP. We didn't really say CME. So if you have backup power, if you have a generator with a propane tanks, if you got a nice little campfire, cowboy cook or something like that, you can still cook your food. You got candles, you're going to have light. But things like going to the grocery store to get resupplied, things like your sink working to fill up water, things like your toilets working, may not, right? In a big grid down situation, they didn't work in Venezuela, so there's no guarantee a lot of that's going to work here. And we're saying the U.S. is split into different grids. Say the power went down on the West Coast. We say, okay, we're all just going to drive to the East Coast while they sort things out. Well, let's divide the country evenly, even though it's not necessarily even. So if you've got 100 million people on the West Coast that feel like we're going to go to the East Coast because they've got power and we don't, what's that going to look like, right? It's going to look like a mess. 100 million people aren't going to be able to get on the roads and just drive to the East Coast and stop at the first hotel that's still got power. Not at that scale. Right, that's going to be a disaster. You're going to have refugees effectively pouring from one area to the other. That's going to make situations worse, right? And how long? How long would a power outage last? And it depends. Once again, it depends on what the attack was. Is it a cyber attack? Is it a physical attack on transformers? Is it one of a lot of things, right? Is it general equipment failure? Is it a natural disaster, right? Depending on the situation, the scenario, days, weeks, months, potentially, right? We seem to have a limited ability to replace transformers. So if there was some kind of a cyber attack that was able to damage multiple transformers or coordinated physical attack, it could take time. It could be more than weeks to get the power back on if one entire grid went down. Now, you would be getting help, right? You would be getting help from the areas that had power in this situation, but if you've got 100 million people, which I know that's not the exact number, but it's not entirely inaccurate. Well, how's the West Coast going to get enough food and water for 100 million people on the East Coast, right? Sure, trucks are going to run, and there would be convoys of trucks coming from the grocery stores, and there would be help coming from everywhere, but it would be a lot of chaos, right? Not saying a lot of people would die. We saw in Venezuela, 43 people died. Smaller country, fewer people, right? Maybe less organized, but you get the point, right? If you're preparing for a blackout, don't expect that help's going to be immediate in that kind of a situation. You want to have your own food, have your own water, have your own backups, and have some security, because once again, their looting happened immediately. It did not take very long in Venezuela. Maybe it would be a little bit different here. Now, I want to kind of up the game a little bit, up the ante a little bit, and say CME, coronal mass ejection. So if CME arrives at the Earth, then I'm reading this here, it can produce a geomagnetic storm, which in turn can cause anomalies and disruptions. So in March 13, 1989, there was a geomagnetic storm in Canada that left 6 million people without electricity for 9 hours. Right, so that's a little bit unique in the sense that the geomagnetic storm creates more of a surge effect on the power line. So there's a greater risk of damaged electronics, damaged, not at the EMP level, but damaged substations, general damage. And if you look at NASA right now, apparently they're running missions to help prevent a cyber or internet Armageddon, right? We'll call it internet Armageddon, and that a large CME could potentially do a lot of damage, and we don't have enough historical evidence on the sun to understand the cycles if a CME is more or less likely at any given moment, but a CME certainly is possible, and apparently NASA is looking into it, right? A large enough CME, you start surging enough power lines, damaging enough equipment. You could have a blackout that might be worse potentially than a cyber attack, because you're talking about multiple transformers damage, which would create a blackout that would last even longer and could be even bigger, right? At that point, if it was a huge CME, maybe you're talking multiple grids down and not just one grid down, creating more chaos and more long-term issues, right? So that is a thing. So once again, NASA is looking at it, so it's not entirely hypothetical. So EMP, let's jump into EMP here a little bit. EMP would be much worse than a CME, right? And let's talk about the reality of EMP, what kind of EMP weapons are out there. If you look at the Russian Federation's military doctrine, plans and capabilities for electronic pulse EMP attack, written by Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, Executive Director, EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security in 2021. And I'm going to paraphrase and grab little bits from the article, but the article is available if you want to dig into it. A combination of cyber attack and HEMP, high altitude electromagnetic device, could result in a total blackout in North America and Europe, effectively losing us World War III, right? Whoever did that would pretty much immediately win World War III. Had a lot of conversations with people about and speculation that we'd continue to fight, right? As the article said, it seemed to be a quick win, but I don't think it would be, right? There would be a lot of nukes flying, things would get pretty ugly. As I said on EMP before, if you're in your car and it shuts down, an EMP attack could be a precursor to a nuclear attack and not a standalone attack. So if all the power goes out and you're like, holy cow, we got hit by an EMP, there might be nukes falling in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So plan accordingly, right, on that. And once again, it's possible to survive a nuclear attack. I did a video on it. First thing that hits is that big flash of light, as I mentioned before. And then you got to worry about things like the blast and fallout. But if you're far enough away from the blast, you might be out of a fallout zone. You might still get the flash of light, and your windows will probably get shattered anyway. But plan accordingly on that, right? So jumping back onto the HEMP, got a little ADD here. Okay, according to the article, Russia has developed super EMP weapons, high gamma, low nuke, and if detonated 400 kilometers above the altitude, they're capable of generating a 100,000 volt HEMP field that would cover 2,200 kilometers. So maybe one and done, right? One might be enough to drop all of the United States. I'm sure they have more than one. Maybe they do too if they're going to do it. Can't say they will, right? Now, according to the article, and I have no way to verify this, the United States military standard for EMP protection is 50,000 volts. Russia's saying they can do 100,000 volts, right? Or we're saying Russia can do 100,000 volts. I don't really know on all of that, but essentially what we're saying is if one of these HEMP, super EMP weapons goes off, there's no guarantee anything will survive, including military equipment, right? That's all I'm saying on that, right? So the last known test of an HEMP weapon was in 1962, known as Nuclear Test 184. We didn't know about it until 1994. Russia EMP'd themselves as a test of the weapons a long time ago. The 60s was a long time ago. It's 2023. Sometimes it's hard to get my head around that. That was 60 years ago. They've still been developing the technology. We really have not been making an effort to develop that EMP technology for whatever reason. I think we were relying on assured mutual destruction, or mutual assured destruction as it's called. Russia keeps playing with the technology. So what do we say and what do we know, right? So we seem to know, according to the article, that Russia has some high-end EMP weapons. No one can know if they're going to use them, right? I don't think they made them not to use them, possibly just as the threat of having those kind of weapons. But if they had them, if they use them, an EMP is going to be worse than a CME, worse than a cyber attack blackout. And then everything's going to stop working, right? Right, all of the grid's going to go down. So now you're talking about no cars to get anywhere, which means no trucks to bring supplies to the grocery store, no electricity to run the pumps, to bring water to your house, no electricity at the hospitals. And it's likely something like an EMP would be a step worse, because now you're saying probably no backup generators, right? No help likely to come from anywhere right away. So depending on the scope of the attack, is it the U.S. and Europe? Would we have allies that would come to our aid? And I don't really know. We do have nuclear submarines, so it's possible that if someone did something like that to us, we would respond with nuclear weapons as well, and World War III would get ugly very quickly. However, if we're nuking a lot of stuff and they start responding with nuclear weapons, it's going to be a lot less help coming. Right? Going to be a lot of nukes going off everywhere. It's not like Canada is just going to roll down here and take care of everyone in America, or Mexico is going to come in here and start helping us out. That gets into that dark year, right? They talk about, the experts talk about that dark year, that 90% of the population probably wouldn't survive the first year without an EMP. One, because of no access likely to any kind of new medicine, no access or real production capabilities for food at any kind of scale. Water is going to have to be scavenged, right? If you have a well, do you have a pump that'll run? Is it in a Faraday bag, right? Small percentage of the population is actually in the mindset or prepared to live in a world without power. It's not to say you can't be one of them, right? That's one of the reasons you might want to prep. You might say, I wouldn't want to survive, and once again, that's understandable to say that, because it sounds very dark and grim. If it were to happen, no one's saying it will. I think if it happened, even if you said today, you know what, I just don't want to survive, I'm not going to bother. If you start starving to death, you'll probably want to survive. Your mind might change, but it might be a little late at that point, right? One of the fun things in the October Falls book 4 is cannibals. The cannibals are out because the rest of the food's gone, right? So whether or not you think right now that you want to survive, I would still think about how you would survive and maybe at least what kind of a plan might look like. Once again, the weapons exist. I can't say Russia will ever hit us with an EMP. Who knows, right? Putin probably knows. I don't know. He doesn't. We don't talk. We're not friends. I don't want you to think I'm on that side or anything like that, right? We're not buds. Don't know him very well. At all. Right, but we don't know, right? You can't say it's not going to happen. Do you want to prepare for it? Blackouts happen, so right, if you're starting to prepare for a blackout, we know super blackouts are certainly a possibility. They're even talking about cyber attacks. A lot of experts, corporations are saying prepare for those cyber attacks on our grid. So grid down should be on your apocalypse bingo card for 2023, maybe 2024. If you start preparing for a grid down situation, think about water stores, think about food stores, think about stuff like candles, right? How's life without electricity? And you can run your own practice tests, right? Maybe turn off the power to your house for a couple days and say, what did I learn? What do I need? What do I have? What don't I have? So you can start preparing for a blackout, and it's probably not a bad idea. You may not want to start with a year's worth of food. If you're not a prepper, if you are a prepper, you probably already have that. But think about it. Think about what could happen, right? The idea of this video is not to scare anybody, but to get your mind going, to start thinking about some of the things going on in the world, how it might impact you and how you might survive, right? We did the risk assessment video probably last week before, a couple weeks ago. We did that risk assessment video. You can't expect anyone else to do a risk assessment for you, right? If you think about the government's response to the last pandemic, and remember very well the night the president was on TV saying, holy cow, something bad happened, we got a pandemic, guys. Well, at that point, it was almost too late to start preparing, right? Had a lot of friends that tried to go to the store. Stores were very crowded that first night. Toilet paper was gone right away, but also some important things like masks and hand sanitizer, the stuff you might really need, were unavailable, right? If you had started preparing when the news articles got released in China, when you saw hospitals being built in China, when they were talking about the pandemic hitting their country, everything was still available, right? So you got to prepare early. You got to assess your risks early, and do what you can, right? As I've said before, don't spend money you don't have preparing for something that might not happen. Don't panic. Don't spend all your time in fear. But think about what could be happening and prepare to the extent that you can. So thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.